Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Cindy Wagman to talk about a HR crisis in the nonprofit world. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this topic started from a LinkedIn conversation that we were participating in, and I was wondering if you could share. But before we share into that part, I was curious if you could share your superhero origin story. That is to
I
say,
love that.
yeah, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Yeah, so I actually decided that I wanted to be a fundraiser when I was in, I think, the summer between second and third year at university. So I actually volunteered when I was in high school in organizations and got introduced to the sector there. And then it's always been a passion to that was my favorite part of university is leading the like volunteer committees and stuff like that. And I met that one summer, I met two professional fundraisers, and those are the first professional fundraisers I'd ever met. And I was like, "Oh, I can do this for a living? Like that's a career path." So I actually right then and there basically decided that that's what I wanted to do. I I wrote a thesis as part of my degree on feminist fundraising and started working in fundraising immediately after I graduated. So I've literally, this been my whole career. I feel like I don't know how to do anything else.
I mean, once you know, you know. I mean, I had a similar trajectory where I knew what I wanted to do when I was a very young age too, and I made all the choices that were completely in line with that. And I mean, even today, it's not so far off from where I started. So sometimes you just kind of have a feel for things.
Yeah.
And just to catch people up on what you're doing these days, how do you spend your time? How do you help with fundraising and other
Yeah.
topics?
So what I over the years, going as a fundraiser, sort of working my way up the nonprofit ladder, as you will, I had the opportunity back in 2015 to start consulting. And so I thought I was too young and not ready, but that was just a lot of imposter syndrome. So at the time, I started consulting. I took on a capital campaign for a really cool small organization and used that as an opportunity to start building a consulting business, which I did, and grew a small agency where at the time we called it Done for You, but we really specialized in running the fundraising programs for small organizations. Now I call it fractional fundraising. Um, so I grew that agency, and in 20, late 20, well, really in 2021, we started transitioning that away from my team doing the work to I now teach other nonprofit professionals how to consult in a fractional capacity. So now I actually don't do any more fundraising. Instead, I help people start their consulting business. So yeah, that's my little trajectory. When started consulting, I really wanted to learn the business side of things, even though like I have an MBA, like I understand business, but it's very different running a business versus having an MBA. And I found all of the resources that were out there teaching people about running businesses these days did not understand what it was like to work in the nonprofit sector. And so I felt like that was an area I could really help other people.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously education where I believe you just learn how to learn, and then there's the real world, and then there's a nonprofit
Exactly.
world, which is not always the same as the for-profit business world.
Exactly, exactly. Like ask any nonprofit consultant, selling to nonprofits is very different to B2B, to B2C. Like it's just a different ball game altogether.
Indeed. So let's jump then onto the topic because you mentioned the word fractional, which is kind of hinting at where we're going with this conversation. But I was curious if you could just maybe summarize what the conversation was in the LinkedIn post, or even more generally, what do you feel is the current HR crisis in the nonprofit industry?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say current, but it's also a long-standing crisis. So I don't think it's new, but I think people, since around COVID, I think we saw the great resignation and people are just have less tolerance for the problem. But actually, a lot of my origin story around how I started consulting came from my experience back when I started fundraising, my first job out of university. So I want to start there because I don't think these are new problems. But at the time, I was right out of school. I was hired as the first and only fundraiser in a very small organization, a small women's shelter. And as someone who didn't have a lot of experience, like I was keen and eager, but I also did a lot of stuff that wasted time and resources because I was learning on the job. And it was lucky slash, I happened to be a good fundraiser, so it was good that I was successful there, but it very easily could have not been a success. And since I left there, I actually saw them try and hire that position over and over again. And what would happen is again, they don't have a lot of budget. So they'd hire someone without experience and they'd come into this pretty big role. And, the board would say, oh, we need to sell holiday cards to raise money, which is not a good fundraising strategy. Or we need to write a letter to Oprah, or now it's Mackenzie Scott, right? Or I was tasked with things like doing an out of home ad campaign that had nothing to do with fundraising. It was just awareness. So I had ads running on like the Toronto transit lines and stuff, which was super cool when you're starting your career, but it really had no impact on our fundraising bottom line. And so all of these things that I spent a lot of time doing were not a good use of our resources, but I didn't have the experience to push back. And that's really when it started to sink in for me that we put people in these positions in our sector because of usually limited budget, and we expect the world of them. And we don't have anyone who can effectively manage their growth. So in my organization, no one around me had any fundraising experience. So the executive director, it was actually a collective when I started, and then there were co-directors, but none of them were fundraisers. None of the board members were fundraisers. And this I see as a crisis overall in our sector, especially in small organizations where we put people into these roles who don't have the experience. And we don't have, in my experience in nonprofits, oftentimes the leadership are programming experts. And we don't train them to be leaders either. And so it's sort of like the lost leading the lost, and it's not great. So all of that has been around for a very long time. And then that really, I feel like, has come to a head in more recent years. And there's certainly been a number of studies where we know that people are leaving the sector. I think it's 76% of people are like actively looking, but if you look at people with less than 10 years experience. So again, those are the people who are filling those critical roles in small organizations that don't have big budgets. 82% of those people are contemplating a job change within a year. That's really high turnover. So we have high turnover, we have people leaving the sector, and that's a problem. And there's lots of ways that we can address that problem. And fractional, I think, is part of the solution. It's not the only one, but it is unique in that it provides a bit of I like to call it like a ladder for small organizations. Because obviously we want to fix how much people are paid. We want people to be paid more. We want better work-life balance. We want all of those things, but there's also the realities of funding and stuff like that. So we have to have some solutions that are creative and out of the box. And I think fractional is one of those tools that we can use.
So to summarize a little bit, then you're saying basically, and there's a term we use in the Salesforce world called accidental admin, where you're basically
Yes.
thrown into the role of a Salesforce administrator without any prior experience. Maybe you don't even have a technology background. You're just kind of forced into it because maybe you're the most techie out of all the people in your little circle. And they're just thrown into it. And, it's like jumping into the deep end of a pool, hoping you can swim and you've never swam before. So it sounds like what you've noticed is that there are organizations that just try to figure out who among them that of the people already exists, are already available, who can do fundraising, which probably is not a great idea because there's a lot of bells and whistles and elements and levers and strategies, and some of these things work, some of them don't. And knowing the difference makes obviously the biggest difference at the bottom line. You can't just reach out to one particular individual and hope for the best. You have to have better ideas. So is that would be maybe a shorter
Yeah.
version? Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I would say that I always tell people like fundraising isn't hard, but you have to learn how to do it. Like anything, right? Walking is not like if for able-bodied people, learning to walk takes people a long time. Like I have my kids are older now, but I remember them learning to walk. They fall a lot. The same thing is true, like learning to fundraise, it's a skill set that you have to develop. It's not hard once you practice and you do it and you learn it properly. And this isn't just for fundraising, it's HR, it's marketing, finance, all of these things. We usually try cut as many corners as possible, especially in small organizations, because we don't see it as the core work, but often it is the engine that runs the organization, and we need to do it well in order for our organizations to meet their missions.
So you mentioned maybe a fractional model would be one solution to this problem, and I want to spend more time on that in a moment. But I'm curious, is it just like a training issue? I mean, wouldn't it be simpler, or is it another viable option to just make sure that the people who are put into the fundraising positions get the necessary training that's needed before they do their work?
100%. I mean, I think as a whole, our sector is not very good at training and development. And I also think that that's a key part of staff retention. People want to grow, they want to get support in the work that they do. And generally, people really want to be good at their jobs. So, yes, training and development, I think, is a huge gap that we have. And there are going to be, again, it's part of the puzzle. So for some organizations who can find the right person, that might be perfect. I think, especially because I mean, it's really hard to fill fundraising jobs right now. But also sometimes you don't have the luxury of time for people to learn. So it's figuring out what are the areas where your organization can be flexible, and when are things so that, and really with fractional, what you're doing, if I can talk a little bit about how that works so that people understand the context, is you, instead of hiring that junior person and training them up, you basically take that same budget that you had for that person, but you hire a fraction of a C-suite or director level person's time. And so what's different about that, and actually what makes it really appealing, especially as like a midterm solution, is that you're getting someone with 10 plus years experience, right? So they're knowledgeable, they're expert, and they're efficient and fast, and you get a fraction of their time. So instead of full-time or part-time, they kind of manage their own schedule and they work to deliverables. So I've noticed that their output is about equal to what you would expect from that junior person if they weren't doing the time waster things. But in addition to getting someone who's an expert doing the work, you also get their strategic oversight. And where this is different is for executive directors who are burnt out themselves, because we know most of them are, who carry the mental load of worrying about these functions, they can offload that. So when you hire that junior person and invest in their training, like amazing, but you still have to oversee them. You still have to worry, are they focused on the right things? Whereas with a fractional, that comes off your plate a little bit because you have someone who's more expert than you, who oversees the strategy. So fractional really uniquely combines the strategic oversight with the day-to-day implementation that I don't think exists really in any other way to address that problem. So if that's part of what you need as an executive director, is to just not worry about, again, whether it's fundraising or HR or finance, like, and you don't want to have to supervise someone, fractional is a really good solution for that.
So all kinds of questions are popping into my head. Let's try to nail them one by one. First one is you mentioned same budget as a junior level. So is that actually true? Can an organization afford a fractional consultant, a C-suite with 10 years experience, has the oversight, and the budget stays the same as if they were to hire up or to train and hire up a junior person?
If you're paying like a proper livable wage, yes, because if you think about the cost, so let's say, and again, I'll use fundraising, and this is actually how we initially set our prices. So let's say for fundraising, you're hiring a junior person. Now, I live in Toronto, it's an expensive city. Starting salary when I was looking at the time was probably $40,000 to $50,000 a year. Okay. Plus, you have about 25% of that extra on top of it for taxes and benefits and computer and all those things. So I don't know what's 25% of 50. Let's say 25% of 40 is 10, right? So 40 to 50. So in Toronto, you can absolutely get a fractional fundraiser for about 48 to $60,000 a year. It's pretty much what you'd be paying on the reasonably. So, and quite honestly, like $40,000 is not really a livable wage in Toronto anymore, but just for illustrative purposes. So yeah, you absolutely, and the only additional expense, I mean, obviously you have like your database and like the actual tools of fundraising, but in some places we need to charge tax for our services and other places we don't. It depends where you're located, but yeah, that's essentially the cost. So if you're in a bigger city like New York or the Bay Area, might be a little bit more expensive, but again, a starting salary is going to be more expensive anyways. So yeah.
Second comment I picked up on was you said this is a short-term solution. I just want to qualify that. Is that meaning that you can do, because it takes time? You mentioned your time could be an
Mhm.
issue. So hiring someone that is already, was a drag and drop, ready to go from the
Yeah.
outset versus someone that has to take some time to scale up and ramp up. But is this something that is more, or do you advocate for more as a short to middle term, or have you seen people do this in a long term type strategy? Like, why did you mention the midterm? Is there something
Yeah.
specific to the timing of that?
Yeah. I think it's every organization ultimately wants to grow, I believe. And so at some point, their aspiration is to develop a team, grow that function beyond just the one person. And at that point, the organization should outgrow fractional as an ideal solution. And really, they should be hiring in-house. So I always think of fractional as kind of a ladder. So instead of a bridge from point A to point B, which is usually level, a ladder really steps it up for the organization. So the idea is it gets the organization to a place where they have the systems and the foundations and the consistency in place so that eventually they can hire up and build that team in-house. That can take years. We do have I work with a network of fractional fundraisers. I've trained about 60 to 65 now. And so I can tell you that, most, I recommend always starting with at least a 12-month contract, because we could also talk about ending fundraising too soon to see results. So it takes time to establish the routine of fundraising and to see the benefit of it. But once you have it, we have organizations who've worked with fractional fundraisers 3, 4, I think 6 years is the longest that I've seen. So it can be that midterm, but it's not like a 6-month project. Any fractional work, fundraising, HR, finance, like these are not quick turnaround jobs. These are stability. This is like really creating consistency within the organization around that function. But and so you need time for that to really solidify so that you can get to a point where you can bring people in-house.
That totally makes sense. It's like an accelerator, right? You hire this
Hmm.
individual to just to ramp you up really, really fast, but then at some point things hopefully would level off, and then you could maybe replace that individual with someone who is more in-house and has the time to catch up and maybe even learn from this fractional consultant.
Exactly.
The third one that caught my attention was you said a fractional consultant is a fraction of their time. And I was wondering if you could, because we didn't really define what a fractional consultant is, and is
Yes.
it different than a part-time consultant? Like, what is it a fancy word basically for part-time? But yeah,
Yeah.
what does it mean to be exact? How would you define a fractional consultant?
Okay. So I love this question because this is what a lot of people are asking. And I will give you my definition. And I would say it's still a little bit of the Wild West in fractional. I mean, fractionals don't just work in nonprofits. This is something that we really adopted from the for-profit world. But this is how I structure the difference. I cannot guarantee that every person who calls himself a fractional fundraiser, a fractional marketer, will structure things the same way. But if I train them, this is how we do it. So part-time work is usually hourly work, right? If you work in-house somewhere part-time, you are contracted to specific hours. And so yes, it's not full-time, but it's a very specific you're paying for someone's time or you are being paid for your time. Full-time salaried obviously is a little that, like we all know, no one actually works the hour like full-time hours. It's much more than that. So fractional, the contracts that I teach people in, we actually don't include time. It's not you are not paying for someone's hours. You are paying for their expertise and outputs. And so at the end of the day, it's really up to the fractional person that you're hiring to manage their time meaningfully and efficiently. But structurally, that is very different than hiring part-time, right? It's a very different contract. It's very different. You really work to a scope of work as opposed to time, really. So that's why it's quite different. And at the end of the day, that actually makes it more risky for the consultant. And a lot of the training and work I do with consultants is around how to manage those scopes of work meaningfully without burning yourself out. But for a small organization, it's great because, again, the risk is taken off of them, and they don't have to worry about all these little administrative things. For so and then compared to traditional consulting, I think it's obvious, but I think it's helpful to just be explicit. Most traditional consultants come in and they have a project. So oftentimes that project is giving advice, usually very good advice, and then someone in-house is left to implement. Or it might be project based in that they're running a campaign, or, we'll do the direct appeal, or we'll do the email marketing, or what have you. Those are very defined in terms of like the project has very specific inputs and outputs and all of the things. Fractional is much more flexible, and you really rely on that person's expertise and experience to set the direction, to set the scope of work, and to focus on the most important and efficient areas of the work. So it's less defined than traditional consulting, and in some ways even less again, like it's not based on hours like you would have in-house hire.
So I'm a big fan of fractional consulting because I actually am a fractional consultant myself. So it's music to my ears to hear that more and more, at least I would like to think more and more people are adopting this model. And I completely agree with the idea of moving away from hourly and going to the expertise and outputs. That's really what you're paying for, is access to my brain or their brain, and the experience that they have. So, something that might take a junior person many hours, maybe an experienced person might take several minutes. And there's no hourly rate that could ever compensate that for their vast experience. So, highly endorse the fractional model, and it should be about outputs. You don't. The analogy that I like to use is if you have a house and if you have a lawn care service or in my case, because Montreal has snow cleaning, you don't care how many people come to clean your place, right? It's one person with scissors or a whole team with very advanced equipment. What you care about is the output. When they're done, do you like your garden or do you like your driveway? The amount of time that they spend is irrelevant. And actually, I would wager you would rather it done sooner than later. And
I would
sometimes,
definitely pay more for someone to do,
exactly,
especially snow removal right now. Like,
especially.
come and do it fast. Sit there while the snow is falling and get it off my front yard. But yeah, there is benefit to speed as well. Quality speed, yeah.
Get in, get out, get it, be efficient. Of course, always professional, but the model itself works really, really well. I was also curious, as we're talking, is there any difference from the nonprofit perspective on how big they are before they should start considering or not considering a fractional consultant? Like, I would imagine that at some point, nonprofits are large enough that they can hire or will have enough funds to hire an expert out of the gates as a full-time employee. So this model more catered toward the smaller and the medium-sized, or do you see some success with larger ones as well?
So I have definitely seen this work best for small organizations. And usually, like, what does that mean, right? So usually what I would say, and this is why it could also work for mid-size, is when you have capacity for one staff person on that function. So you have budget for one fundraiser, you have budget for like one HR coordinator or manager, you have budget for one marketing position. And instead of hiring that junior person, you get to hire a fractional, like experienced, highly efficient person. When that person starts to manage teams and things like that, it really doesn't work as well. It can, a small team, as it transitions, or if you are really looking for, I would say less of a long term, but maybe a couple years of stability to a program. But beyond that, as you start to add more and more people, I don't think it works. I haven't seen it work. You could do interim, which is structured differently, and it's closer to full-time work, but shorter periods of time. But yeah, so that's been my experience. I'm always happy to have someone prove me wrong, but it really is uniquely beneficial, I would say, as well, for organizations who just have that capacity for one person in the function.
Okay. I'm curious then, from the consultant's perspective, you mentioned about capacity and time management. So, because a lot of our consultants, at least in my world, because they're hourly billing, they know their capacity, they know they dedicate certain hours to certain clients. So they might have two, three, four, whatever number of clients, and each one is allotted a certain amount of time so that the consultant knows when they're at capacity or under capacity and can make adjustments. If we're talking about, of course, now non-hourly and more outcome-based, how does a fractional consultant manage their time to make sure that they're not overloading themselves or they have capacity to do more?
Yeah. So I learned it the hard way through trial and error when I was building my team and we were taking on clients, and I had to figure out how much could we meaningfully manage. Um, with fundraising, what I've seen now consistently is 3 clients is about full-time work. Some people want to take on more than full-time work. Some people want to take on less than full-time work. Some people need more coaching. I would say, like, generally as a rule, we've worked our lives, usually 10 plus years, in 9 to 5. And we have to be really intentional about not recreating that. And so it really is incumbent on us as the consultant to figure it out. And let me be frank, like, sometimes there are costly mistakes. The risk is on the consultant in this case. If you end up taking on more than you can handle, you just got to figure it out. And you got to work through it and learn. So there were times in my experience where we were extra busy and we had to adjust things, but it's never been at the cost to the organization. Um, that being said, so again, for fundraising, I think three-ish clients is about full-time work. I have seen with other functions, there is a little bit more. It could be a little bit more. So sometimes like marketing could be 3 to 4. HR, I think also about three. Like that's just what I've observed having done this for the last few years. But it it's as much about learning as a consultant, really learning how to structure your time, how to communicate boundaries, how to get out of your inbox, and how to say no. The thing is, an organization is hiring a fractional executive because they're the expert. And what happens is we often slip into the doer where we're just doing all the things. And it becomes really easy for the organization to say, well, can you also just do this? And can you also just do that? And the answer should be no. If it's strategically not a valuable use of your time, it is on you as the consultant to say no and to say no as the expert. Here's why that's not something that makes good sense. If it's something that you think is still important for the organization, I can recommend, other resources or someone else who can do that, or we can change the scope of work. But it takes some learning to learn how to consult and some practice just to get used to setting boundaries because we're all very much people pleasers and helpers in our sector. Like we truly, genuinely want to help. And we all have a lot of skill sets because we've worn many, many hats. And so we can help. And so it's really hard for us to see a problem that needs solving and not actually solve it. But that is important when you learn to consult.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I actually put it into practice as well. I've noticed over time, I mean, there's many ways of slicing it. You could take a very logical approach of trying to figure out how much income you want to have in a year and then how many clients you want to have and divide that to determine your rates, or how much time you want to have or don't have. That's more of a feeling. It's not really, but the time part at least is more of a feeling. I
Mhm.
don't really calculate time anymore either. I've noticed, for example, I do usually 2 to 4 clients at a time. But of course, I have this podcast, I have an app, so my fingers are in multiple buckets, and I find anywhere between 2 to 4 project-based clients to be my limit as well, because I
Yeah.
don't want to overstretch my means, and I'm able to sustain myself in a comfortable living with that. Some people might be more motivated to go even further, but I think boundary setting is definitely key. And one trick I've learned, and I might have said this before on the podcast, um, because it ends up being more of a conversation at the end where they might ask for more or things that are beyond your initial decided scope. One way to help determine whether you will be successful in these kinds of conversations in the future is to do what I call a dinner date test.
Mm.
So, as I'm having the initial conversations with a potential client, and just I'm observing our communication styles and whatnot, and behaviors and energy level, whatever you want to call it. I ask myself, can I imagine myself having a meal with this person or these people in a non-business context? And if
Mm.
the answer is yes, I will most likely, or at least I will continue the conversation. But if the answer is no, I will just say, listen, I don't think I'm a good fit. Maybe I can refer you to somebody else who is, because just having that harmony, that communication, that understanding is so important. And I've it so far it hasn't gotten me wrong. I don't know how many dozen or so clients I've had since I started implementing this test, but it hasn't guided me wrong. Every single time, when because it's more deliverable based and not task based, even they might ask for more, and I say, listen, this is a great idea. I totally agree we should do this, but like, let's save this for a later phase. And just being able to know that I can have that conversation is an important part, and that's what the dinner date helps with.
Yeah. So, yeah, I often teach it as like, how coachable are they?
Mm.
So, and how you can find that out in the discovery call or sales call. So, and I imagine this is very similar for you. So, in fundraising, like most organizations that you're talking to really don't know fundraising. Like they're not good at it. And they have very misaligned expectations. So oftentimes that will come, and I've seen with technology and databases very much the same. Like people don't know what they're looking for. They're just like so outside of their expertise that they'll say really um, things that like to most people are like red flag, right? Like we just need like we in fundraising it's often like, oh, we just need to get in front of the right corporations or something like that, which is actually usually wrong, or we need a gala. And so I would say oftentimes organizations will have these quote unquote, I'll call them orange flags in conversations. And so it's a really good opportunity to test, are they just misinformed and you can coach them to something better, or are they really headstrong and they do not want to listen? And so in those discovery calls, I teach people, okay, so this is a great opportunity. You mentioned the focus on corporate, based on my experience, that's not always the best solution. Are you open to, like, part of the first deliverable that we have is a plan? Like, if corporate's not on that plan, will that be okay with you? Like, will you trust my expertise in guiding you in the right direction? And if they at that point are like, no, 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 it needs to be corporate, that orange flag is very red. Whereas if they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Okay, yeah, then they're coachable. So to me, I always look for coachability because, again, these are functions that clients have not no experience with. Sometimes they actually just have really bad experiences with, and they're often misguided. And so, and again, I see that with organizations looking for databases, and they're like, we need this one or we need that one, or my friend at this organization says they love this one. And it's like, no, 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 like that's why you're bringing someone expert on, but like let them be the expert. So that's often what I will coach around, is say, like, what's a red flag versus what's just like they need to be coached.
Yeah, staying in your lane, open to new ideas, and realizing that the reason why you're hiring this person is because they're an expert. So let them
Yeah,
let them
let them be
do
the
what they do
expert.
best. Yeah.
Yeah.
So far, all of it sounds fantastic. I was wondering if there's any cons to this kind of model, or situations where this is not a good idea to pursue.
So I mean, it's kind of linked to what we were just talking about, is if you don't want someone who's going to um, be the expert, if you, and we see this with founders a little bit more, where you're used to doing things your way and you have a very clear idea of what you want, you just want someone to come and do the work. Don't get a fractional. A fractional is uniquely positioned as that expert with the expertise that you don't have. So if you just want someone to delegate or manage more of the administrative tasks, or run around doing what you ask them to do, then do not get a fractional. If you, and I again, like, the size of the organization, I think is also a key. Like it's not going to work for everyone, but those are the two circumstances where I would say I've seen consistently. So the organization is too big, or they're expecting. So one thing is, they might have a budget for a director level position, and they might want to hire a director level position in-house. That's also not a good fit for fractional, because a fractional really, their efficiency is to replace that junior position. If you want a full-time director level position, I don't think a fractional has like the same years of experience and all of that. You just have a fraction of their time. They're not miracle workers. They're not going to replace a full-time person at the same level of experience that they are. So it really is designed to help organizations take a manager coordinator level position and level up, as opposed to replace that full-time director level position that you have. So that's the other circumstance where I would say, like, if you want a director and you have the budget for a director and all of that, you probably need a director and not a fractional.
Yeah, I mean, because we talked about it being a fraction of time, but I also see a fractional consultant as a fraction of services. Like a director
Hmm.
might have, I'll tell you, 8 major core responsibilities. And of course, if you're not working full time, you can't do all 8 of them. It's just not feasible, or it wouldn't be very
Exactly.
effective if you even tried. So it's not just a matter of fractional time, it's also fractional responsibilities. Maybe they can do 3 or 4, let's say, of those 8, but that's it. So you have to decide and realize that they will not be able to achieve everything that a full-time person can, because we are all human. And I was then curious, because it almost sounds like fractional consultants are almost a preferred way over part-time employees. And I was curious, like, could you see the market being flooded by fractional consultants, people leaving part-time and going to fractional instead? Like, is there a certain, I don't know, like, because there's always a balance between, for example, a full-time employee and just a part consultant, external consultant, regardless of whatever type it is. And most businesses kind of balance between the two, right? They want to have some in-house experience that they believe at least will stay longer term and grow with them, and then as needed experts that can come and grow more easily. And now if that part-time portion is now being split into the hourly type part-time and the fractional, like, is there a, I don't know the exact way to phrase this question, but like, would that imbalance things, or is it just a piece of another type of offering that won't really change the way organizations work? Like, I think you're trying to know what I'm trying to
Yeah.
get to, but I'm not really phrasing it
Yeah.
properly.
I mean, in my 20, almost 25 years in the sector, I've seen very few I've seen very few part-time people. And I don't know why that is. One is I think like most of the time organizations do need that person there. But aside from programming, I think programming you see more um, like shift work and things like that. But when you look at the functions that fractional can serve, it's very rare that you're seeing part-time employees. That's just been my experience. So again, people are welcome to prove me wrong because I think these functions are a little bit different. Like, I think, again, it's different than programming work. So, can it upset, like, I guess what you're asking is like, where is the equilibrium? And I don't know, mostly because I really just haven't seen that many of these functions done by part time people. And so, but I really do think the difference is around that expertise and strategic oversight versus like someone who you can delegate to and offload things to. And so if you as the executive director are a really great fundraiser and you just need a like part-time fundraising manager to some of the more the administrative tasks or follow up on things, like great. I would say if you're an expert in the thing and you have the capacity to oversee and delegate to someone, then that could be a really good use of a part-time worker. I just feel like if it's a function that the organization lacks expertise, then fractional is a sanity saver.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for, equilibrium.
Yeah.
Thank you for helping me with that one. I was curious to know if there's any other trends you see in the future. Like, do you think there'll be more fractional consultants in the future or less? Is there always going to be a place for them? Because to me, it's also a relatively new term. So I was curious to know if you have any ideas or
Mhm.
inklings of what future trends we can expect from this kind of role.
Yeah, I think in the mid term, I can't speak for long term, but in the next like 5 to 10 years, I see this growing quite significantly. Right now, I think the world feels like a very unstable place. So the other thing that's happening is so first of all, people are leaving. So there's vacancies. So if you can have one person serving 3 organizations, automatically you're just filling more capacity that exists. So there's roles that need to be filled and there aren't people to fill them. So I think that makes fractional really attractive. Um, I think people are looking to consult more than they ever have because want to be in more control over their time. I also think we even talked about, but when you get to a certain point in your career, in order to make the money you want to make and, reap the benefits of having that experience, there are very few organizations you can go to in-house. Usually there are hospitals, universities, colleges, those kinds of institutions. And I've worked in those institutions. It's not where I want to go back, right? And so I think for other professionals, at a certain point, you want to be in more control. You feel you've put in the time to get to be your own boss. So I think people are just looking to get out of those situations. So again, I think that more people are going to fractional for that. And I also think that the world is very unstable right now. And I think organizations are feeling very risk averse. So fractional is less risky than hiring in-house as well. And so, I mean, I never want to be the person who's saying, like, don't hire in-house. If you can find someone who can do the work in-house and provide someone with good pay and balance and stability, like, amazing, do that. That's always great. But everyone is, I think, more risk averse in an already risk averse sector. And again, I think, like, there are enough benefits to fractional for organizations who fit that bill that we've talked about, that it's going to grow. I think we are seeing a lot of growth, and not just in the nonprofit sector. We're seeing this in the for-profit sector as well. There's something like, according to research, that there's been a 57% increase in fractional roles since 2020.
Wow.
Right? Like, there's definitely, this is not just our sector, this is growing everywhere. So
Awesome. Cindy, this has been great. Lots of cool information and great conversation. I was wondering if you could share with people your contact information so they can get in touch with you if they have any follow-up questions.
yeah. So if you are okay, fractionalfundraising.co is my website. And there's information if you want to find a fractional fundraiser or become a fractional fundraiser. Also, you can go to nonprofitfractionals.com, which is one of my newer websites. I host a virtual summit called Fractional Shift, all about running a fractional consulting business in the nonprofit sector. You can join the waitlist, and there'll be more stuff growing there. And of course, LinkedIn at Cindy Wagman.
Awesome. Cindy, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thanks so much for all the things that you do and for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, well, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.